Welcome to CFO 4.0, the future of finance. The CFO role is changing rapidly, moving from cost controller to strategic visionary. And with every change comes opportunity. We are here to help you take advantage of this transition, to win at work, drive your career forwards, and lead with confidence. Join Hannah Munro, Managing Director of ITAS, a financial transformation consultancy, as she interviews key experts to give you real-world advice and guidance on how to transform your processes, people, and data. Welcome to CFO 4.0, the future of finance.
So hello everybody and welcome to this episode of CFO 4.0. As usual, I am your host, Hannah Munro, and with me I have a returning guest with us today on the podcast. So Susana Serrano-Davey, whose voice you may recognise from previous episodes. So welcome back, Susana.
Thank you, Hannah. Thank you for inviting me to come back. It's lovely to be here.
Well, and I think just to set the scene for our audience, so I think we're on the cusp of a real change in basically how we operate as businesses, how individuals operate. And so I wanted to explore the people side of that, because a lot of people are talking about, and we've talked on the podcast about AI, technology. What does that mean for the future of work? What it means for businesses, jobs, all these kind of things. So there's a lot of talk about the technology. What I've not seen a lot of conversation about is how do we help people navigate this change, both in terms of, how do we as leaders, keep ourselves resilient and looking forwards, and how do we support our team? So that's the topic I'd like to explore today. So I guess, Susana, when you think about environments that you've been in previously, where there's been sort of a big wave of change coming, where do you start? How do you start preparing people for that, even though you don't necessarily know what that change looks like?
I think I have been involved in a lot of change in my career. So whilst AI wasn't there then, it's still affecting us all in our daily life, and it's impossible to move away from it. And I think the first thing is to start with honesty. Clearly, we don't know the destination, but normally when we embark on a process of change, in my experience, is because we're seeking some kind of improvement. So if we don't lose sight of what are the benefits we're trying to get through applying the change, not losing sight of that carrot, I think it is important. Because sometimes, inevitably, change will involve a lot of pain. Sometimes it may involve lots of teething issues, things you weren't anticipating. So for a short time, things will get a lot worse before they start to get better. Also, it will involve perhaps getting the plan slightly wrong, because, of course, it's all conceptual. So inevitably, what you end up with will not be what you started off in terms of your idea. So just be honest with the team and say, hey, this is our carrot. This is what we're aiming for. This is what we want to achieve. Acknowledge that it will be a difficult journey. Just come clean and say, hey, it's going to be really difficult for a while. But that carrot we want to get to. And above all, communicate with them. Because only this morning I was talking to a mentoring client, and in his office, they've just gone through a big restructuring program. And people have been moved to their new desks, given role descriptions and change managers. But there has been very little, if no, communication on a person-to-person basis. Just like you and I are talking to each other now as two individuals, paying attention to each other. And that somehow doesn't happen when change goes through in organizations. They think it's okay to get on with it without just recognizing that there are not little children, but there are people involved, and people that have emotions, and they have fears, and they have insecurities, and they have expectations as well. So that would be where I think we need to start. Honesty and acknowledging difficulty and good communication.
And we talked a bit about the carrot at the end. So when I hear some of the conversations going on at the moment, and I can see why it would be hard for an individual perhaps to see the carrot. I think for the business, there's a carrot, there's an improvement in productivity, or there's a cost saving to be had. But How do you handle it when there isn't a carrot for that individual?
Well, I think probably there'll be a number of scenarios that we can't discuss them all here, but if we try and bucket them. So imagine a company is trying to bring in either a new system or AI, as you said, usually to save costs and to make the organization more efficient. So that individual, maybe, first of all, is that individual part of the plan? So if that change means that that individual is no longer required, clearly what we need to do is allow that transition to happen in the least painful way. So be mindful in terms of how we handle the dismissals or the restructuring process, and again, be honest, get it over and done with. Let's not pretend that there's anything other than eliminating that role. But in most cases, I think it won't be that end scenario. It will be the fact that someone is being asked to do something in a different way, or they're being asked to change their areas of responsibility. And if they fall into that bucket, I think there is always opportunities, because how can you not find opportunities in learning something new, in perhaps exploring areas of a role that you haven't been able to explore before because you were too bogged down in the nitty-gritty that the company is trying to get rid of. And so I think if you think there is no carrot, you need to ask again, because there is probably a carrot there, whether that might be learning, whether that might be the opportunity to change job, to evolve your job, or even if the time comes to do something else within the organization.
And I loved your thing about your optimism that we, because I'm the same, right? I look at every new thing that comes across my desk as something new and exciting, an opportunity to learn and develop and to get into something new. But what I've learned over the years is not everybody feels that way about that opportunity. So how do we, as leaders, how do we help people see the excitement in learning something new, perhaps if they haven't necessarily got that instinctively?
I have lived that myself, both in my own skin and through my team. And the first thing I'd say, as a leader, you need to believe in it. And quite often, leaders are out there pushing programs that they don't believe in, or they themselves don't stand behind emotionally. So if you're listening and you're a leader and trying to push change through your organization, ask yourself, are you really fully behind it? Because if you're not, this is like a whiff. Your team will be able to tell. And if you're not truly in it and believe that it's the right thing to do, others won't buy it. And I think if you are able to transmit that honesty, that believe in that indeed is the right solution, you haven't just been asked to do it by group. This is very typical in group settings. When you have massive organizations, that somebody at head office thinks, it'd be a good idea to implement a new tool that is going to save us lots of time. So everybody else in that chain that are actually in contact with the people that have to do something differently, if they don't buy into that, we've got almost like a flat tire before we start the race. Does that make sense to you, Hannah?
Absolutely. And I think that's a really good point, isn't it? Because when you think sometimes about the structures and the hierarchies with different organizations, you're right. It can just be a directive from group. We need you to make this shift, or something that's put into your KPIs. So let's talk a little bit about how you navigate that, because you're right. Bringing your authentic self and your passion for a project is critical to the success of it. What would you do? So if you, in the scenario, let's just say group have said you need to implement a new system rollout. Maybe it's a group system, maybe it's you need to go out and source your own, right? And you don't necessarily believe in it. What would you do?
I would look for, first of all, are there any pain points that we have that can be addressed through that? Because sometimes, imagine that group has decided, or you're being made to implement this change for somebody else's agenda.
Yeah.
But there may be the opportunity for you to fix some of your own agenda through that solution. So clearly there might be that you imagine if it's a system that you end up using it for that thing that you have been asked to do and beyond. And in the meantime, fix some of your own teething, some of your own problems, some of your own pain points. Or it could be that you need to enter into some kind of negotiation, because sometimes I have certainly, when I have been involved in big development of change programs, usually they come with what is called, or I've known as vanilla. This is the vanilla solution. This is what we want you to adopt. This is what the group wants to implement. But clearly we need to adapt that vanilla solution to fit your market or your region or your organization. And it's in that design and negotiation that you may be able to sneak in a few little prices, I guess, so that even though you may not believe in the original concept, there is something positive you can get out of it for your own team and your organization.
I think that's really great. So almost like the reverse, because one of the things we talk about is before you make a step with a change program, make sure you're clear on what you're trying to achieve and the ROI of that. If you've been given the end results, I love that we're creating the ROI before we step into it to make sure that we can stand behind it. That's a really great way to look at it.
Because there is always, I think with technology as well and systems, whilst there may be many things that we don't like about them, there's no point in resisting. And I think actually this point that I'm thinking about now is applicable not only to change in the business world, but life itself. When something is inevitable, resisting to it is just futile. We're just going to spend a lot of time, energy, frustration in resisting. Whereas once we say, okay, it's like, I don't know, somebody dies. It's one of the worst things that can happen to any of us. The bereavement phase of that is all about, why did it happen? Why couldn't it be someone else? Why did this happen to me? What if I had done this? What if I have done? The truth is that person has passed away. And the sooner we acknowledge and accept that, the sooner we can move on to the other stages past bereavement. And this is the same with change and business. What's the point? It is what it is. So you take it or you leave it. And again, I think that's sometimes an option that many people don't see in front of them, especially people in finance. I have spoken over the years, and I still do, to many people that are deeply unhappy in their roles. And these are bright, well-educated, highly technical, able people that somehow, when they're in that situation, stuck against that wall, don't think, hey ho, I have options. I could go to another organization. I could ask to change role within my organization. Why is it sometimes when we come against these challenges, we don't value ourselves enough and recognize that there's a lot of options available to us, and we don't necessarily have to just eat through that dish that we just don't want to eat through.
And I think it's that lack of choice. And that's the piece I think it's really important, right? And it's one of the things that I've learned as a consultant, right? Because as a consultant, you don't necessarily have control over the people that you're dealing with, right? But you can influence, right? And you can suggest and you can hint and you can do all of these things. But you don't hold somebody's direct line report. So when you need somebody to do something, you can't do it. So one of the things that I've always learned is to give people choices, because I think there is when you give people the perception of choice, even though you like all of the options that you're giving them, that they then can choose to go down and they're much happier, right? So giving them 3 options, all of which you are comfortable with or you can deal with, is much better than almost giving them one thing that they're not happy with, because by the time you spend your entire project fighting them alongside it.
Yes. And managers will have exactly the same challenge. I think there's a myth out there that people that think that managers can have their team do what they say. I never experienced it in that way. Nope. So we just talked about in terms of being a consultant, I think managers have exactly the same challenge. You have to persuade them. You can't make them. We're not in a dictatorship that you put people in jail. It's all about trying to engage with them. So those kinds of approaches, I think, will work whether you're a manager, a consultant, or even that the external provider working with people to implement that particular solution.
And I think that's why when I see people that have made a choice about, say, an ERP implementation or a new piece of technology, and they haven't involved their team, for me, the red flags go up, right? Because you haven't given them a choice, right? They may not want to change at all, but just giving them the choice of two systems to decide on, the fact that they've had an input, however small or insignificant,
yes,
actually helps them move forwards. And I think that's the point, isn't it? Is that and I hate to use the word perception, but it's the perception of control and choice and your ability to influence that impacts your willingness to take on board that change as much as anything.
Yes, and I would second that and add that it's not only about choice, but it's about voice.
Yes.
Because when you give the team the opportunity to explore all the pain points that we're suffering with, and also exploring the possible solutions, what tends to happen is that people realize there is no perfect solution. There is always a compromise. So when they have been active and they have been able to use their voice to participate in that conversation of finding a solution that might not be perfect, but actually is the best available, then it will be much easier as well for them to buy into that.
One of the hardest things, I think, is actually putting into words what it means to work with myself and the team here at ITAS. Because not only are we a financial transformation consultancy, but we do it using Sage technology. So rather than me tell you how awesome we are, let me introduce one of our customers.
Working with ITAS has dramatically made our lives simpler because there's just such a knowledgeable team there to help us. Before, we felt the consultants we were working with at another company, it was always a challenge to get information out of them, for them to understand the problem, and it just didn't feel like they were on our team. Working with ITAS, it's almost, we feel like you are all employed with us to work with us to do it. It's an absolutely fantastic relationship, and it's just made it such a smoother process and an absolute fun process working in Sage Intact and coming on our calls. I look forward to it now.
And let's dig into those scenarios. So say you're given that verdict from group, right? If we keep along that line, because that is such a common scenario, right? You've been given a directive by group, you have to do something, whether it's change to reporting or whatever it is. So more controls, whatever. You found some wins in it. You've got yourself on board, right? And you now actually, I can see this is pointless, right? And maybe you've got a team, right? You've got a mix of people that are going to hate this because they just hate change generally. Mm-hmm. You've got a couple of people that, might see some value, but really don't want to deal with this because they're already working at capacity. And you've got the bucket that you've actually taken on the journey with you and on board, right? How would you approach those different groups to try and create some consensus for this change?
I think part of the challenge is that when you've already given the end scenario, the end goal, without having involved your team in a conversation, I think it's very difficult because you're already almost like you're too late, that boat has sailed. Yeah. But what you can do as a leader, though, I think generally, and not specifically linked to a particular project or a particular implementation, is create that conversation of constant search for improvement. So, for instance, one of the things I used to do, and I didn't come up with it myself, I copied it from a boss that I really liked working with, is every quarter I'd have a meeting with my direct reports to look at our roadmap of change. So, and we had built a diagram with all of our, with what I call the pillars of finance. So we had in the diagram, we had financial control, we had AR, AP, we had all the different services that finance produces. And within that, we had all, at the high level, the activities of what each of those pillars did. And we had ranked them according to how happy or unhappy we were with them. So we had green areas that were sailing, everything was going right. We had orange areas that were there were difficulties there, and there were red areas. So if you build within your team that awareness of where your weaknesses are in terms of processes and the services that you provide to the business, then when a new solution comes in, even maybe an imposed solution, is not, you're already thinking about change. You're already used to every quarter walking away from that particular meeting thinking, okay, what's my improvement project I'm taking away with this quarter? Because you're already in that mindset of constantly changing. Then one more thing coming down from group won't break the bucket, because you're already working on delivering change. Whereas if your mindset as a leader with your team is, we just have to keep up with the day job and we just have to only do what we're told, then I think there's more resistance to that.
And I think that's a really great, almost that mindset of building a mindset and a culture of change, right? Mm-hmm. How would you deal with a scenario where you've got maybe a manager in your team that's feeling overwhelmed by the change? Maybe you're in private equity and you're feeling there's a lot of change that's been asked of you. They're being getting a lot of demands from other areas of the business or other teams. How would you approach, and that individual's going, I just can't. I don't have the capacity. I don't have the mind space. How would you deal with that scenario?
You bring me lots of memories, Hannah, because I have lived a lot of that. And I remember a particular scenario, and I think this is a very typical scenario of a colleague of mine, someone that worked in my team, that she's worked in my team in more than one company. It's one of the best team members I've had, and I've enjoyed working with her. But in a way, she was her own enemy, because she was so competent. She was so demanding and such a perfectionist that she just put the load on until she was at breaking point. Yeah. And I remember a time when she was at breaking point and I could see that she was struggling. So I asked her to have a catch up, and we had a long cup of tea. And I said, but tell me, what are your problems? Tell me what your challenges are. And she said, well, I simply have too much to do. I just can't do it, but I'm trying. And she was working weekends. She was doing all the things that a lot of people do. And I said, but why haven't you come to me and said, Susana, I have a problem with this. Let's look for solutions. And in the end, out of that conversation, what came up is that clearly she couldn't do it all. You can't. This is almost like pretending that it's not happening. If you're struggling, if you're overwhelmed, the worst thing you can do, in my opinion, is stay quiet about it, because you will break. You may have burnout, or you will, worst of all, you will lose your enthusiasm and you'll end up resigning, and then the organization will lose you, and you might be a really brilliant team member. So you need to speak up and say to your manager, Susana, or whoever he or she is, or they, I can't keep on like this. Help me. And with that, you can say, okay, start reprioritizing. What are the things we're going to put aside? What are the things we can delegate? What are the things and then your manager might have to do the same thing. Speak up and say, you know what, you want me to do this, but clearly without the additional resource, I can't do that. And I don't think we're brave enough sometimes about that. We have these very silly fears that we're going to be fired if we say no. And if you can't, you can't, because the reality is you won't deliver anyway. If you're overwhelmed, you're not going to deliver. So in the end, your reputation as a professional will suffer because you will do a poor job. So my advice would be just speak up. And if you have to say, right, I've come to here and this is how far I go and I won't go any further, and resign, then do it, because things will continue to pile on until you break.
But what on the flip side, what if you can see a team member is struggling, but you can see they're overwhelmed, but they're not willing to engage, or that they won't have a conversation with you about how things are operating and how things need to change? Because sometimes they almost lock down, don't they? Because they just can't cope with the conversation itself. So how would you deal with that?
I don't think it's ever happened to me that someone is not willing to talk to me. I suppose that is down to your managerial style. So I suppose if you have that problem, you need to ask yourself, am I the kind of manager that someone will open up to? And I think if you approach someone and says, oh, can we, let's have a coffee, have a chat, clearly take them out of the office. This is something really cool, because in my experience, when you get somebody in a meeting room surrounded by glass and everybody's walking by and they can be seen, that's not the best environment to have a heart-to-heart conversation with someone if you think they're struggling. And I think if they're not willing to have the conversation with you, you have a bigger problem that's just your change. You may be paying enough attention to your team. You may be criticizing in public. I see a lot of people that do that, have a big wobbly and start pointing fingers at the wrong time. So I'd put the ball back in my court if I had that problem.
Yeah, assessing how you're approaching it as a manager more than anything, if they're not willing to have a conversation.
Yeah, your general style, absolutely.
So we've talked about we've made an assumption as well with a lot of these changes that we know our team well, right? What if we're a new manager, right? Because we, maybe somebody coming in, and very often I've seen this before, a new D, a new CFO, give it almost brought on with the mandate, I need you to roll this out. How do you help a team when you haven't had necessarily the opportunity to build trust and rapport and all of those things you say, that kind of that history of relationship? How do you approach that?
You need to build it. It's as simple as that, because people won't trust you until you've spent time with them. And I think I always recommend, in general, when people take on a new role or even an existing role, the first thing you need to do is look out and think, okay, what does my stakeholder map look like? Who is important? Who do I need influence? Who do I need to get close by? And your team are part of that. And what tends to happen, I think, often in senior roles is that people come in and they only look upwards when they're looking at the stakeholder map. And they make time for the networking outwards to the other directors, to the CEO, but they don't make enough space for their team. And so starting to do things like having monthly team meetings or weekly stand-ups, especially now that we have so much remote work, is even more important that we do that. Because if we don't make ourselves available to create almost that huddle feeling, then they're not going to trust you and they're going to resist you. So I'd say don't try any tricks. Just spend the time, meet them one-on-one, get to speak to them. As part of your onboarding, you need to be having meetings. If you have a team that is very extensive, clearly you might not be able to meet everyone, but certainly your DRs and even one level below, and then create opportunities for you to meet informally with everyone in the team. Just organize a drinks evening to get to know everyone and chat, because that trust you can't buy, you can't get instantly. You've got to build it. So the sooner you start, the easier it will be for you to make that rollout successful.
And so we've gone through the scenario. So we've been given a directive, we've come on board, we've built relationships, we've taken the time to get to know the team, our direct reports, team below. We found some goodness and some reasons for change in this policy. What do you think a good communication cadence and approach looks like when it comes to change? Where have you seen that work well?
Well, I've seen it well actually. I remember when I worked at TUI, one of the things, I came in after the change had already started, but one of the things I saw being done that were very effective in that they were fixing a shared service center that was broken. And you had 150 people in the UK and same amount of people in India. So a lot of people to get through, a lot of change very quickly. And what they did was just have a very simple weekly stand-up on a Wednesday morning, I think it was. There was a 10-minute all hands on. And each of the leaders of the different sections of these shared services just gave a brief update of this is what we've done this week. This is what we've achieved. This is what we're working on, so that everybody was part of that movement. And there were little things like giving people. I remember one of the things that was done was creating manuals, process manuals, so that the team in India could do the processes better, because part of the problem had been that they hadn't been documented well before. So of course, how can you outsource the process well that is not documented correctly? And so every team member had a number of documents, massive documents to produce. And they had these flags every week. They had these green flags, orange flags, red flags that they controlled on how well they were doing with the documenting for the week. So it wasn't somebody giving you a prize. It was you saying, this is how well I'm doing, great, or I'm not doing so great. So just be creative. That's what I'm trying to say. Just something simple. It doesn't have to be an hour meeting where everybody sits down and you have a lot of PowerPoints. Just an improvised conversation like you and I are having, albeit with some basic landmarks, are very effective, I think, in bringing people through change.
And what if, because obviously very often you can be working with global teams that are all over time zones. How would you effectively manage a change communication strategy when you've got people in different time zones that it's really hard to get everybody on a call and in a conversation necessarily? Is there any tips you could give us around that?
I suppose the most effective way is to share some KPIs. What are the headlines? What are you tracking? Are you tracking the number of processes being documented? So if you have 500, this week we're at 200 out of 500, or is it the number of regions we've rolled out? So choose 3 or 4 data points that you can share and celebrate with everyone. I think that would be the way to keep them in the loop.
Yeah. So finding ways that people can get a quick grasp of progress and
relate to. And above all, celebrate change. Don't just look at what's to do, but think, okay, this is everything that we have done. One of the things I used to like to do is at the end of the year, we'd have our normal team meeting. We'd focus on what have we achieved so far. And I think sometimes we forget the inspirational power that has to say, okay, what have we done so far, rather than always looking, what do we have to do? So when you're running a project, I think having a way to somehow communicate that, whether that might be because you let people give themselves an update on their teams, is all the progress we have made on our team, or even at individual level, perhaps pick one person in the team that can share, oh, look, this is all that I've done. That is very inspiring, I think, and it gives people more energy to continue on that journey. So you see, imagine you're going up a mountain. I remember I did a long trek a month ago. I was only 15 kilometers or so of mountain. So for mountain, 15 kilometers is not a walk in the park. It was challenging, especially in certain parts. But this route was marked along the way, and you could see, instead of telling you how much you had left to go, it told you how much you had already completed. So you were kilometer 1, kilometer 5, kilometer 7. And that is very powerful, looking at what you've done so far.
Yeah. And that's a really great way to think about that. You talked about those regular change meetings. Yeah. Where have we got to? How far have we got before we start looking ahead?
Yes,
yeah,
because otherwise you've achieved a lot of things and you're just looking at that mountain and thinking, oh my God, I still have so many things or so many kilometers to do.
Amazing. So, as always, Susana, we can keep talking for hours, but I promise I won't keep you for hours. So I guess just to sort of close off this conversation, what are your top tips for creating a culture of change within your team?
First of all, make sure you yourself are change driven, because if you're not, it's not going to go very far. Second of all, I guess, be honest and communicate, engage your team. We talked about this. 3, keep moving and don't get too attached to the outcome, because in my experience, all the projects I have been involved in, and even in my own life when I've tried to do certain things, the outcome is never what you thought it was going to be. So make sure you are flexible enough in terms of the outcome. Make time to support your people, to know them, and to be open for their voice, to hearing their voice, not just say you want to hear it, mean it. And as we just said, just make sure you look back, not only forward, so you can keep that motivation. And if need be prepared to say no.
And that can sometimes take a lot of courage, depending on who's asking and what they're asking for.
Yes.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Susana. If people have enjoyed this podcast and want to learn more about you, what you do, where's the best place to find you?
It's very easy. You Google my name, Susana Serrano-Davey, because I'm the only one, and you will find my website, you will find what I do, you'll find my books, lots of content that I have online, like your lovely podcast as well. I run my library. And I'd always love to hear from new people and engage.
Thank you so much, Susana. It's been fabulous to talk to you. And to our listeners, if you've enjoyed today's podcast, perhaps there's some questions I didn't ask. I'd love to hear from you as well. Please do reach out and let me know. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, then please do, of course, like, share, and leave us a review, because it does make all the difference.
It does.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And we'll see you next time on the CFO 4.0 podcast.
Thank you, Hannah, and thank you, listeners.
Hey, Google. What's the best accounting software for my business? Give it a couple of years, and I bet you she'll be able to answer you pretty accurately. But for now, it's still one of the few questions Google can't give you an answer for. But we can. Take our free quiz and find out which Sage product is the right fit for your business. Just head to itassolutions.co.uk.